Yeah, so this is Krisha. This is a movie that I found by accident one day. I was just surfing around Amazon Prime and saw this movie called Krisha, did a little bit of research, and saw that it was the same director who did It Comes at Night, which at the time I had heard of but hadn't seen. And so I decided to watch it. And I kind of fell in love with it. And I have seen this movie, oh gosh, probably 6, 7.
Whoa.
Welcome to the Silver Screen Guide podcast. Join Corbin and Alan, along with guest hosts, as they bring their love for the cinema to discuss films from every genre and decade. Learn about the history of the film, little-known facts, and insightful explorations while they enjoy discussing your favorite film. The curtain is rising and your podcast is starting, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your guide to the silver screen.
Happy birthday, Alan.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. This is a very special podcast. Alan picked out the movie that we are reviewing today. This is his special birthday pick, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this is Krisha. This is a movie that I found by accident one day. I was just surfing around Amazon Prime and saw this movie called Krisha, did a bit of research, and saw that it was the same director who did It Comes at Night, which at the time I had heard of but hadn't seen. And so I decided to watch it. And I kind of fell in love with it. And I have seen this movie, oh gosh, probably 6, 7 times, I want to say, by just showing different people, just saying, here, you need to watch this. And so I think like the first week or so that when I first watched it, I had showed him like 2 more people. So yeah, I've seen this movie a lot, and it has since become one of my favorite movies of all time, mostly because of the background info that we'll get into here a little bit. I'll be able to say a little bit before the spoiler warning, but there's some aspects to this background that I feel are worth saving till the spoiler portions of this podcast, because I feel that the movie looks completely different knowing some of this background info. So I feel that we should probably save some of that until later.
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued to learn more about the full background and making of this film. I didn't know really anything about this film until, I don't know, what would you say? It was probably about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago that you discovered this film?
Yeah, it was about a year and a half ago. I know it was the summer of 2018 when I discovered it, because I was working in Chicago. And so that was when I found it. And I remember when I found it, I wasn't too long after I found it that I told you about it and said that you need to watch it. And then at one point I was going to try and have us watch it, but that never ended up working out.
Yeah.
And I even had this scheduled last year for my birthday podcast. This was scheduled it was put on the schedule for a little bit before I swapped it out with something else. So we did almost review this at one point, but then I pulled it out and replaced it with something else. I can't remember what we did last year. Oh, Patterson, that's what it was, Patterson. So yeah, so you have actually almost seen this a couple of times, it looks like, but have been able to evade it.
Well, and also the capability to watch it keeps getting pulled out from under me, because you discovered it on Prime, and then you were like, I'm really scared this is going to be taken off of Prime soon, because you know how streaming services are, they cycle through content. And you were just telling me before the podcast how this has been essentially out of print for the past few years.
That's right. So this is owned by A24, which they were more well known now than they were back in 2016 when they released the Blu-ray of this. And so when Krisha came out in 2016, they bought the rights to distribute it, right? And so they were selling limited copies of Blu-rays. I think they only sold like 100. Oh, wow. Since then, they have been out of stock. And long story short, when I discovered Krisha, I looked around trying to find the Blu-ray anywhere and just couldn't find it. So I put something up on Reddit and was like, hey, does anybody know where I could find the Blu-ray of this? I think it may have been the A24 subreddit. And the collective answer was, good luck finding it. So at that point, and that wasn't long after I discovered it. So at that point, I did a bit more research, and pretty much you could buy it on eBay, but if you wanted the Blu-ray, it was like some stupid amount of money. So I kind of just gave up on it until this morning of the podcast. I got a message from a user on Reddit who had seen my post and said, hey, just so you know, Krisha has been restocked in the A24 store. And so when I woke up at 5:30 this morning to go to the bathroom, I saw this message and bought it right there. So it'll be here in a few days. But it looks like it might be caused because of Trey Edward Schultz's new movie called Waves that is being released. I think has gotten a wider release at the time of this recording, which is about beginning of December. So that's my guess as to why it was restocked. But yeah, now I finally have the Blu-ray, not here currently on the pod as of this recording, but eventually I'll have the Blu-ray, which is finally I've been waiting to have this.
I'll also be curious for you to tell me what special features are included with the Blu-ray, because I could see this one having some pretty tasty, some pretty choice special features to really dive into this film.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would love to see the short film of this because this is based off of a short film. And I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I looked all over the place and you can't find the short film anywhere. So, I think it is on there, which would be fantastic to see because I would love to see where the original mock-up was, where it came from and what it was like.
Yeah, I would definitely be interested in seeing that short film as well. I could see how this is born out of short film because this film is, once the credits roll, it's less than 80 minutes, which is in itself a short film. It's not a long film.
Yeah, this is a very short movie, but I would argue to say, given its subject matter and the things that it deals with, it almost feels like it's 3 hours long and more like a nightmare. And so, I mean, we'll get into spoilers here in a little bit, but I feel like this movie feels a lot longer than it actually is. It says it's 121 minutes, but I think it's more like, it feels more like 2 or 3.
And that's exactly what I thought too, because when I looked and it was like 80 minutes long, I'm like, oh wow, this is going to be a short movie. And I'd probably say like the first act goes through fairly quickly, but then we won't get into spoilers just yet. It really begins to just kind of like the pacing and how you feel into it. It wants you, the director wants you to really kind of wallow in some of the pain and the circumstances and really like persist in those moments. And boy, did I feel it, because I was looking at the clock and it was like, okay, I have half an hour left. I'm like, that doesn't seem long, and then I looked at it again and it said 25 minutes left, not because I was clock watching and wanting to get over, but I'm like, whoa, that whole just 5 minutes ago was, I mean, that in and of itself almost felt like half an hour or 20 minutes. So it's really incredible what he's able to do within 80 minutes of the movie. And as of this recording, as of this right now, it is available on Netflix. That's where I watched it.
Right. Yes. So this was originally on Prime, which I would assume would have stayed on Prime because A24 has most of their films on Prime. But yeah, it just recently, within the last couple of months, moved over to Netflix. So that is currently, at the time of this recording, where you can watch Krisha. So yeah. So here's a couple more little background info things before we get into spoilers. Trey Edward Schultz, this is his very first movie. And he never went to film school, which I found out today, and I still don't believe that.
That is hard to believe.
Yeah. And he got an internship with Terrence Malick on his movie Tree of Life. And that's kind of where he was able to kind of kickstart his career, was off of that.
That's a big internship.
He had always had like a camera with him, but like he never really ever made something like this before. And like I mentioned earlier, Krisha, the movie, is based off of a 15-minute short film, which essentially deals with this exact same thing. It's just more condensed. And so after that short film came out, he was able to get enough funding. He went through Kickstarter actually and got about $10,000 from, actually it was, his goal was 10,000, but he got 14,000 from Kickstarter and then was able to make the actual full-fledged feature, which is Krisha, which ended up going to, let's see here. It got nominations from the Critics Week Grand Prize and Golden Camera from the Cannes, and won Audience Award and Grand Jury Awards at South by Southwest for narrative feature, which is pretty prestigious award ceremonies for films.
Well, and especially for someone, this is his very first film.
Oh, yeah.
Which, of course, watching this movie and realizing this was Trey Edward Schultz's first film, I could not help but think of Damien Chazelle.
Oh, yes.
And more so Damien Chazelle's second film, because if you're gonna compare like first efforts, I would say this film is better than Chazelle's first film, which we did review all of Damien Chazelle's current films, which you can go check out in the archives over at Silver Screen Guide. But absolutely, I was impressed with this first effort for a film.
Right. So I guess we can get into our usual budget Hollywood box office earnings and things like that. It's going to sound a lot different than what we usually go over because this is a very small independent film.
Yes.
So the budget ended up being about $30,000 in total.
What?
About half of that was from Kickstarter, and then the other half of that was probably from distribution and other companies that he was working under that gave him a bit more money to work with. So yeah, budget of $30,000. Opening weekend, it opened in, I think, 2 theaters for its first weekend and then moved up to, I think, about 23 or 24 theaters for the next couple of weeks. So opening weekend, it got $10,000. Once it was finished going through its theater run, it domestically got $144,800. And I don't have anything for the foreign market. I know that because it went to Cannes, it got something from Canada, but anyways, there aren't any numbers out there. So its worldwide total was $144,822 in total, which usually we talk about hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office when we get to this portion of the background info. So it's very different than what we talked about before.
For an independent film, it did very well for itself, and especially because it did have A24 distributing it. And
yes,
like you said, in the past few years, A24 has really rocketed to stardom. They've had a number of their movies reach the Academy Awards, and I do notice a pattern with A24 films, though. They always seem to be either dark or depressing or very introspective, something along those lines. That does seem to be the movies they're drawn to. Not always, but more oftentimes than not. And especially the way this film opens, I very much had vibes of Melancholia, Lars von Trier's Melancholia, where it's just that slow zoom into Krisha's face, and I'm thinking of Kirsten Dunst, and she's super depressed, and I'm like, oh man, I know what I'm in for now.
Right. Right. So when it comes to like what movies came out around this time, it opened week 1 at number 70, which once again, because of the budget it has and how many theaters it opened in, it's not too big of a surprise. Around this time, Zootopia had been in its 3rd week. Allegiant from the Divergent series was out for its 1st week. Miracles from Heaven from its 1st week. 10 Cloverfield Lane, which we reviewed a while back, for its 2nd week. And Deadpool for number 6 was week 1. Week 2 went up to number 50. Batman v Superman came out that week. My Big Fat Greek Wedding came out that week. And then week 3, 55. And so, yeah, its theatrical run is really nothing too much to talk about in terms of what place it made it in, because it's so low on the list, because it didn't release in as nearly as many theaters as what these movies did, that it's kind of dumb to compare it to what would come out and what place it was in and how it fluctuated in that placement when it comes to box office. Yeah,
and I would make the case this was never, and probably could never be intended for a really big budget, wide release that a lot of people would just be flocking to the theaters to see. I don't really see how that would really even work.
Absolutely.
I guess the closest thing I could think to compare it to, which maybe is a bad idea, but like I said, Melancholia did come out in theaters, but Lars von Trier was an established director, and that movie I don't think did gangbusters at the box office either. It's kind of hard to get people to see a nihilistic, depressing film such as that. But looking at a messed up family, I'm thinking of Ordinary People. But for Pete's sake, they had Mary Tyler Moore and Donald Sutherland and Robert Redford behind all of that. And that is, I would say, that is different, though, than Krisha in many ways.
Oh, yeah. That movie...
Different approach.
Although they both do deal with family, heavy themes of family, the way that they go about it and who is in the movie is vastly different than what we have here and compared to ordinary people. So let's get into scores real quick. IMDb at a 7.2, which is pretty good. Metacritic at an 86. Rotten Tomatoes with a critic score of 95%.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's crazy.
Is it
with
certified
an audience
fresh?
score, I believe it is. It also might not have enough to be considered certified fresh. I don't actually know those numbers. I just know that it is 95%.
Sure.
And an audience score of 78%, letterbox score of 3.7. So it looks like audiences tend to like it, but critics love it.
Oh yeah, when I saw it had a Metacritic of 86, which mind you is no small feat to achieve a Metacritic score that high, and 7.2 is a very solid score on IMDb.
Yep.
It is difficult. Most movies kind of wallow in the sixes, but yeah, this movie is critically acclaimed, very critically praised, and gosh, that has to be a good feeling for Trey Edward Schultz to see his movie do so well and people to love it this much.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I would love to know what his thoughts were when he made it into Cannes and made it into South by Southwest and got nominated and won those awards for his very first feature. This is his very first feature-length movie that he's ever made, and it's now making it into pretty big film festivals. I think that's crazy to think of. Even though it may not have made it to the Oscars and may not have gotten a very wide release, what it did do in terms of what awards it got and how much fame it ended up getting, I would assume that he was very ecstatic about that.
He would have been. And I did check, it is certified fresh.
Okay. I figured as much, but I didn't know if there were enough critic ratings to consider it fresh.
All right, listeners, if you haven't yet seen Krisha and you don't want the film spoiled for you, go ahead and click pause right now. Go ahead and watch the film. Come back and click play, and we'll be ready to talk about it.
It has been years since Krisha, played by Krisha Fairchild, has seen her family. The estranged 60-year-old says to have come clean. Robin, played by Robin Fairchild, Krisha's sister, convinces the family to allow her to come back for Thanksgiving. For the Thanksgiving dinner, Krisha is tasked to prepare and cook the turkey. She gets it done, but the loud and obnoxious family does not help with the anxiety she is already under. Krisha heads outside to smoke and talks with Doyle, played by Bill Wise, a man who complains about his wife's 12 dogs, all of which he hates. Krisha attempts to reconcile with Trey, but it is clear that the relationship between Trey and Krisha is severely damaged. Krisha calls him upstairs to talk a little bit, but it's clear that there is a lot of hurt in this relationship. Later that night, Gigi arrives, who's grandma, and Krisha's mother. She says hello to everyone, but when it's Krisha's turn, she becomes very confused. With this anxiety of the family gathering, the worsening relationship with Trey, and Gigi's confusion, Krisha copes by sneaking a bottle of champagne away to her bathroom. It's now time for Thanksgiving dinner and time for the turkey to come out of the oven. While the family continues hanging out, a drunk Krisha removes the bird from the oven herself. Unable to hold the weight and with no help from the alcohol, she drops the main course on the kitchen floor. Krisha is taken back up to her room. After waking up from a stupor, she calls her boyfriend, they don't really explain who Richard exactly is, but she does call Richard, who is a love interest for her, and curses him for not being there for her, even though he said that he would. She heads downstairs to hopefully rejoin the family for the Thanksgiving meal, but Robin takes her back up. Robin is very upset with her sister, as she wasn't clean as she let on. Robin tells her that she convinced the family to let her come, despite the members being uneasy about it. However, Robin tells her sister that she can still make it right, begging Krisha to try and get better. Afterwards, Krisha heads into Trey's room and finds a bottle of vodka. She then begins to snort some pills along with the consumption of more alcohol. She heads back downstairs to her family and begs Trey to love her again, saying, "You're my baby, you came out of my body." As family members pull her away, Trey says, "You're not my mom anymore." Krisha then turns on Robin, and Robin says to her, "I'd rather he be one of me than one of you." Cut to a close-up of Krisha looking straight into the camera as it loses focus, and credits roll with the dedication from Trey to his friends and family.
Oh, man. What a heavy film.
Oh, I warned you, too. I warned you before, like about a few days ago, before you watched this movie, that it is going to be pretty heavy. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the heaviest, and like I said, as soon as we got that establishing shot of Krisha, and it's just her face, and you're just zooming in on her face, and she doesn't blink, and we do have this very intense score going on, and I'm like, oh gosh, this is very reminiscent of Melancholia, and I'm like, also thinking this film absolutely gives me David Lynch vibes and Darren Aronofsky vibes.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, who have all made heavy, depressing films about the dark side of life and trying to come to terms with that, or cautionary tales of some sort. I'm like, okay, I know what I'm in for. And he does a great job of establishing the tone of the film right away. And Trey Edward Schultz tries something very risky that could have backfired on him, but thankfully it doesn't. And that is simply plopping us down into the middle of these families' lives. Oftentimes, we don't even meet most of the characters per se, because it's as if we are one of the family. We immediately start from the perspective of Krisha, and we come in, we have been estranged as well. And the way he puts us into the family, I think, works really well, thankfully. That could have backfired and could have made us feel disconnected, but it doesn't.
Yeah, you're right. He does essentially take this whole movie and put it completely inside of the perspective of Krisha. She knows about as much as her family as we know.
Right.
For the most part, we do get some like background information from her sister Robin, which we know that the history of with her mom and stuff like that. But for the most part, the younger family members, we don't really know. And we kind of pick up pieces as the movie goes along, just along with Krisha. And that's what this whole movie is essentially about Krisha's experience going in and trying to reconnect with her family, who she hasn't seen in about 10 years because of her drug addiction. She was pulled away from her family and was supposedly getting better. But we find out that might not actually be the case. And so this whole movie is her perspective on this Thanksgiving dinner that she's being a part of. And it really only takes place over about a day, not even 24 hours. And you get to see how fast her downfall is, just because of part of the anxiety and because she hasn't been as truthful as she let on.
We immediately come to see kind of the true personality of Krisha is that she is still a pretty angry, bitter woman who is not excited to see her family. She's very nervous, understandably. And she is going to the wrong house. She is stepping in mud puddles and just cussing up a storm because of it.
Right.
And you can tell she's really mad, but she puts on a happy face trying to make the best of it when she gets in there. And you can tell the tension is tangible, and especially when this unknown man comes into the room, which you later come to find out is your son. He seems to kind of just give her the cold shoulder, gives her a very, nonchalant hug and walks off. And we're immediately established that there's some really difficult family dynamics going on here. And Krisha is not as put together as she wants to present to her family.
Right, yeah. She comes off as if she's fine, everything's good, and that she's not as stressed out as she actually is. And we find out pretty fast with this opening that she clearly has not been here before, because she goes, like you said, to the wrong house, knows that there are dogs, but there aren't any dogs in this first house. Oh no, I'm at the wrong place. And so we get pretty quick that wherever she's going, we don't know where exactly yet before the door opens up for her. But we get to understand pretty quick that she doesn't know where she's at. Which when we find out later, like in the same shot, that it's her family, that begins to make me wonder when I was first watching this, okay, what happened with the family? Why on earth why does she not know where her sister's house is at? Especially when we find out later that Robin is her sister. So yeah, it does bring in a lot of questions. And there are a lot of things in this movie that it doesn't explain to you outright, but it'll explain some things in dialogue that are kind of just one-liners. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss some of that dialogue that I feel does a good job at explaining the situation that this family is currently under.
This is one of the best films that I've ever seen that does show, don't tell. I would say this is one of the best examples of that, which, as I've already mentioned, could easily backfire, and the film could come across as just super ambiguous. Almost, I think that was one of your difficulties. One of the things you didn't like about It Follows. Was it was just trying to be too ambiguous for its own good. Thankfully, that isn't the case here. Thankfully, this is, and I think one of the reasons because of that is because this film is relatable. Now, maybe you haven't had a family member go through this drastic of a situation, but regardless, nobody's family is perfect, and there's always everybody has at least some family dynamic that you wish could be different, or it's a little stressed or strained. It's somewhat awkward. And I think that's what helps make this film more relatable in bringing us into the events of the film.
Yeah, and there are scenes in here where you get to see kind of the craziness of the family happen, where it happens pretty early on, not long after Krisha gets there, and she's tasked with, getting the turkey prepared for the dinner that night. You get to see kind of the family in the background being really loud and obnoxious and kind of going a little bit crazy, and how in one shot or one part of this establishment of the family where Dr. Becker comes in and he's like trying to find a lid for the Tupperware and is getting kind of frustrated that there isn't one there. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he gets a call from his boss or whoever, and he has to run away and take it. There are emotions just flying everywhere, right? And so that was one of the things that I fell in love with when I was first watching this scene. Was this feels very similar to how my family operates during a gathering like this, mostly my mom's side. But it's crazy how scary and accurate this scene is, and how this family is represented compared to my own family. That was initially what drew me in and sucked me under, was just this depiction of family, which is interesting because most everybody you see in this movie is either related or is a family friend of this family that you see. And so Robin and Krisha are actually sisters, and they're sisters in the movie and they're sisters in real life. Gigi is actually their mother. And then Trey is Robin's son, and Krisha is Trey's aunt. Oh, and so not only is the depiction of family so palpable here, they're actually family. And most everybody here is either family or friends, and they only hired on two actual actors, but you would never know that was the case if you didn't know that information, but knew that the people in the movie are actually family.
Oh, so Trey's actual mom is Robin?
Yes.
Okay, that's cool. I didn't know that. And Krisha is his aunt.
Right.
That's really cool. That's interesting. He chose his aunt to be his mom in the movie,
right.
But it works really well.
Right. And I kind of get it because Krisha is an actual experienced actress. She's done other movies before. So my guess is he picked Krisha because she's had a lot of experience when it comes to the acting world and is able to show a lot more emotion than maybe Robin would. That's just my guess, is why he picked Krisha to be, the main character of the story.
Yeah, Robin does a great job at the end, though. But
she does. Yeah,
it does make more sense that he would position Krisha as his mom, and it is cool because the characters' names in the movie are, for the most part, their names in real life.
Yes,
these people.
Yeah. Right. So the only two actors here that are actual hired actors are Bill Wise, or Doyle in the story, and Dr. Becker, who is played by, I have his name down here, played by Chris Dubeck. That is Robin's husband. He's a hired actor, and then Doyle is a hired actor. Those are the only two. But once again, you would never know that was the case unless you looked it up. And it said Dr. Becker was a hired actor, but I didn't know who that was in the story. I had to look it up and do a bit more research to find out who exactly Chris Dubeck is playing in the story.
Yeah, and in some ways it does feel like I guess that makes sense why everybody's chemistry works so well together.
Yeah.
Because this does feel like a slice of life. Like this could be a home movie or something. Yes. Somebody is walking around with a camera and just filming these people, just living their life. So nothing feels forced in that capacity. It does feel very much like a slice of life, a day in the life of this family and the very traumatic troubles that they have to deal with and go through. And so I think that really did lend to the chemistry between everybody, is that, like you said, they're already literally family, or they were actually friends, which it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why this movie has kind of become one of my favorites. This is one of the reasons is because me and my cousins, and I've mentioned this in podcasts past, me and my cousins, we make films all the time together. We make, every time we're together for a holiday or whatever, we'll sit down, at least take out a few hours of a day or two and just film something. And that was kind of what led up to what we would consider to be one of our best projects, which was a music video. And we filmed it off of our own experiences and off of where we were at in our life at that moment, and related it to just some random song that we found that we've known for a while. And when we did that, we were very happy about the project and even won an award for it just on some YouTube thing. Yeah. And we just had no idea that this would go that far. And so when I see this and I see movies like this and movies like, I also mentioned this the time was Damien Chazelle's first movie, which I can't remember the name of currently off the top of my head. But when we saw his first movie, which is a student film, I got that same vibe of, this is a director's he wants to tell the story so bad. And he does so, even though he has very little money and very little budget, he does so and does a surprisingly very good job for what he's given, and is able to tell the story, even though he isn't able to have as much money as a lot of directors would. And that was what initially drew me to this movie so much, is not only this depiction of family, but also that he's actually using his own family in his own film and telling a story that, surprise, surprise, is actually very personal to him and his family. So that was one of the reasons why I love this movie so much when I first watched it, was because it is a movie about family for his family with a situation that actually happened to his family. It's very interesting and very inspiring to me to see that.
And the way he writes the characters, the writing feels so real. And I found that to be really incredible, especially just the writing. And I thought some of the writing is hilarious, especially with Uncle Doyle, and he is very crabby and cranky, but he's also pretty funny. But then he's also pretty nasty, and you can see he, in certain ways, can be just as selfish as Krisha. He thinks he's like looking out for his family, but ultimately he's just looking out for himself, where he's like, I've had to put up with this and I've had to put up with that, and you're making our lives harder, which all draws back to himself, whereas Krisha draws to herself. But Krisha is a different type of pity party, which becomes very apparent at the end, where she's like, I'm the screw up, and you'd love me just because you're my sister. And you could see it's really all about her. But as I was saying about the writing is incredibly real. And I would say pretty early on in the film, you just come to feel like you're not even watching a movie anymore. Mm-hmm. It feels like you are just watching a real life scenario play out, which is a great compliment, I would say, to be able to achieve that level of realism, or that suspension of belief that I'm not watching a movie anymore. I'm watching, it all comes so naturally to all of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like someone sat down and just placed a camera in the kitchen of some family's apartment. It's like Trevor Schultz literally took the camera and just set it down in his parents' home, and then hit the record button and just walked away, and that the movie just kind of speak for itself. It's very interesting that he does that. And by the way, I kind of forgot to mention this earlier. This movie is also shot at his parents' house. Oh, okay. Yeah, so this house that you're seeing, this is the house that Trey, I don't know if he grew up in, but I know that this is at least the house that his parents own. Wow. So not only is it at his parents' house, it's also with his family and a story about his family. So that's also part of it. So yeah, I think that also speaks to just how natural the dialogue just feels in this movie. It's because I don't know how much of this is actually ad-libbed and how much of it is written down on the page. It may have just been something where Trey Edward Schultz says, okay, I want just this to happen, but doesn't write out the specifics and just lets the family play off of it. That's almost what it feels like. I don't know if that's the case, but it feels like that's how he wrote this movie, is just wrote out kind of where he wants the scene to go, and then let his family do the rest because of how well they play off of each other.
Oh yeah, I could definitely see that being the case, and it definitely feels like that's the case, because they already have such great chemistry because they're family and some of them are friends. So being able to work together like that makes absolute sense. And one of the other things that I was really impressed with, which did help my emotions in the movie, is this seems like it could be a movie without any score and it would perfectly work, because the action and the acting like works so strong on its own. But when we do see Krisha and she's like chopping things up, and just something about the motion of chopping is kind of a frenetic, kind of a frantic motion. And then all of the noises are getting to her. There's a new baby in the house. There's some young testosterone fueled young men doing crazy stuff all the time. And you could see these little things. She's not ready for family life at all, because anybody who's been to a big family get together, it's pretty loud and crazy most of the time. And that's okay. I mean, that's just how family is, but it immediately puts Krisha on edge, and you can see the cracks are already visible in her supposed armor that she's been working on. So the score is great. I was very impressed with how it made me feel on edge as well.
Oh yeah. The score of this movie is very interesting because in a few of the tracks at the beginning, they tend to use real life things to build a score. Like at one point, they drop a drumstick in the middle of that part of the composition as part of the score, or they use alarm clocks to kind of show that, Krisha's paranoia around the actual timer that's set for the turkey is getting to her. It's very interesting ways of showing, not only showing, but also like building anxiety within a score while not using more traditional methods. They use a very weird, and the score, if you listen to it on its own, is very, very strange because they use so many different things. There are a couple, these two scenes where she's in the kitchen on the actual soundtrack is called Woodpecker Part 1 and Woodpecker Part 2. It's interesting that they use such weird things here in about the first half of the movie when it comes to crafting the score, because it's supposed to build anxiety and it does a very good job at that. But the way they go about it is not as normal as you would normally see with something like this. It feels like very abstract when it comes to what they use to build the score, and I love it.
I also saw this as kind of a jumbled interpretation of how Krisha's mind is kind of processing everything, and it's just kind of this like really blusterous cacophony of noises, and that's just how, even when you're with family, it just kind of all garbles into this kind of monstrosity of noises in certain ways. And I would see that that's how she's hearing it. And so in a way we're in on what she's hearing.
So I kind of want to go back to the acting real quick, because there are a couple of scenes in this movie that legitimately just hurt to watch. Not because they're bad, but because of the complete opposite. They're so well acted and are just feel so raw that they actually, even though I've seen it 6 times, they still hurt me to watch. One of these scenes in particular is when Trey and Krisha have like their first private conversation in her room upstairs. And there's a point in the conversation when the camera starts moving forward and she's asking, what about your film career? Why aren't you exploring your film career? You're great at that kind of stuff. Why aren't you doing that? And he eventually just snaps and says something to the effect of, why can't I just be a business major? It's not like I don't like doing that. And won't even look at her. And she's like, will you please look at me? Will you please talk to me? And he eventually just walks away. And that conversation, you kind of, at that point in the movie, it's pretty clear what the relationship is between Trey and Krisha, that he is her son. But the emotions and the way that they play out that scene is just it hurts to watch. It's so raw and feels so real that it surprisingly is very, very effective, even though they are not actually mom and son. Even they may be aunt and nephew, but it's still, they do a very, very good job at acting here in this scene, and really throughout the whole movie. That's just one example.
Yeah, that's a fantastic scene, and one that I found to be relatable. And I think everyone who is a child can relate to that scene in some way, because we've all been mad at our parents at one time or another, and the way Trey acts, trying to act like everything's okay, but it's like clearly he wants out of that conversation as fast as he can.
Right.
Nothing is okay, and he's just saying anything he can to placate her. Just lots of, yeah, it's good. Yeah, I've been busy. It comes across as so fake, but
yeah.
I mean, who hasn't? And maybe not even with your parent, maybe with like your significant other. If you're mad at them, you'll say things to placate them that you think will work, but ultimately it's pretty obvious it's not going to work, and it's going to lead to some kind of combustion. That was a fantastic scene as well. And I thought another great scene that stuck out to me was it's intercut. It kind of transitions over a few different scenes where Krisha is out talking with her brother-in-law, Doyle, and they're having this really funny conversation about dogs. And I really enjoyed that. But then it takes a really sharp turn. And all of a sudden, he's like, you need to stop acting like you're a 16-year-old who's trying to go find yourself on some hippie journey. And he's like, you need to get your life together. But he says it in the most unloving way possible. It's totally harsh and very aggravated. I'm like, whoa, this just got extremely awkward. And the way it's written is also very real. I don't think there's anything in this movie that feels phony at all or unrealistic or ever took me out of it. But I'm like, yeah, these family dynamics seem absolutely real.
And this even kind of plays with the character of Krisha herself, because I feel like that second conversation with Doyle never happened. And I say this because at the end of the movie, you kind of have something similar that happens where there's a conversation that's had between Krisha and somebody else, and it'll go back to that a little bit later. And it's like the vibe is completely opposite than what it was originally. So this happened in this scene where she's first talking with Doyle, and it seems to be a very happy conversation. You know, them kind of getting to know each other a bit more, and figuring out where they are in their lives. And then when we cut back, Doyle is very hostile, and she's playing the victim. This happens again at the very end of the movie when it comes to Robin. When Robin talks to her, Robin's very loving and caring towards Krisha, and says, you haven't lost all hope yet. You can still get back up, and you can still try. You have to try. But then it cuts back to that, and Robin is just essentially just cursing her, saying, I can't believe you did this to me. This was your one and only chance, and you blew it. And all that, and all this kind of like just hurtful things. And so what I've seen here is Krisha thinking, it also accounts to the editing too, because when Doyle's conversation first happens, that's before she meets with Trey. After she meets with Trey, not long, I think it's like right after it's right after she has like her little talk with Trey and it goes south, that she thinks back to that conversation with Doyle, and it's completely opposite, and she's playing the victim. And so I think what she's doing here in these two scenes is she's taking the situation that was fine before, but is twisting it in a way where she feels as if she's being blamed or she's the victim in the situation, and feels as if her family doesn't actually want her to be there. That's what I'm seeing in this movie. And that's, I think, also just helps build the character of Krisha up even more, is seeing how she twists all these situations, maybe because of the drugs that she was under, or how they've changed her mind being under the influence or whatever.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I didn't think about it being a different, like a potentially false conversation she has with Doyle, or maybe her interpretation of how the conversation goes with Doyle, but I could definitely see it being that way. And I have to give kudos to Trey Edward Schultz again, because he edited the movie. And I'm like, what?
Yes, he did.
I'm like, because the whole time I'm like, this editing is incredible. How it's rationing up the tension, or the shots that linger like outside of Krisha's door after Trey leaves, and then just lingers, and we're just left with her thoughts. And I'm like, oh man, it lingers just the right amount. Also, when the two parents, Robin and her husband, are the camera's slowly pulling out and the audio is drowning out, and we're just kind of left with just looking in on them on the outside looking in. But there is very much that kind of split personality to the editing. And I think the best scene that it's showcased in is when Krisha is about to ruin the turkey, and she's in this haze, and her face is split in half by the refrigerator.
Right.
And that music is crazy. And that just shows that she really does have this, honestly, kind of split personality going on, where she knows she needs to take account for her actions and she could be better. But on the outside, her true colors are showing because she did decide to relapse and become inebriated again. And I really loved that shot.
Oh, yeah. No, there are some great shots in this movie. That one is a great one. Even the opening shot where she looks dead at the camera it sets the tone really, really well, because it's almost as if she's looking at herself in the mirror, right? She's reflecting on the situation that just happened. And at the end of the movie, you see her, she as first looking down, looks back at the camera and then fades out of focus. And so it does a really good job at when you see both of these, and then also when in my opinion, where you see these conversations that happen between Krisha and Doyle, and Krisha and her sister Robin, when they happen one time and then when they cut back to it, it's completely opposite. It feels as if this is all her replaying the events that have just happened with her and her family. And so what this is her thinking back as to what just happened. And it's hard to say if she does overdose in the end, or if she is given a choice in the end, if she's going to live, if she's going to hopefully get better. It's really hard to say, but it seems to insinuate that she did in fact overdose at the very end, because of when the credits come up, it's a white screen, and then letters are all black when it comes up. So it's kind of hard to say what exactly the ending is pertaining to, but it doesn't negate from the fact that this has some fantastic cinematography, fantastic and very, very meaningful cinematography.
Oh, yeah, it is very meaningful. And I was appreciative of that, because oftentimes it seems like first-time directors can try a little too hard with what they're doing until they kind of learn to kind of pull back. But thankfully, he seems to have done pretty well. And at first I thought when the audio kind of drowns out as it pulls back, I thought something was wrong, but then I realized that he was doing that on purpose.
Right.
Then it made sense. But yeah, back to Krisha and her victim mentality. It does really lend true that addicts do perceive themselves as victims of their circumstances, and that justifies their reasons for either being an alcoholic or addicted to some kind of drugs or something of the kind. That does seem to be the case. And you could see Krisha, even in jest, kind of pulls out that victim status when she sees her mom after a super long time. Her mom says, "What did I do wrong?" And she says, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. I'm the one that's always messing up, remember?" And she says it in jest, but you can see there is she clearly hasn't healed through that, or she's trying to make light of circumstances that shouldn't be made light of. But You're absolutely right. She does have this victim mentality. And as soon as Krisha says that I'm going to try to get better, then all of a sudden she runs to Trey's room, gets the vodka and gets the pills. And then she's remembering the conversation in this crazy way. And then she goes downstairs to have this big blowout. And the way Robin starts talking to her then doesn't seem to fit with the way she talked to her before. I don't think Robin would say, "You need to try." And then she's like, "I will love you always." But then she just says, then Robin gets vicious, lots of vitriol in that voice, and saying, "How did you hear that? He says he's not your son anymore." And they literally start fighting. And so the way that I saw the end, here's the way that I saw it. I saw it could go two ways. And I think this is what Schultz is trying to present to the audience, is that Krisha can say, "I'll try and get better," and be embraced by her loving family, or she could basically, Krisha was trying to commit suicide, which is what I thought from the beginning, is she would probably try and kill herself in the end, and then have this one last hurrah of going crazy and trying to do that. So let me get this right. The way you see it, do you think she does die in the end?
I can see both ways, because the way that the credits are presented, where the screen literally goes white after she already ingests the pills and drinks even more vodka. I can see it going both ways, where with this ending where she does the pills and all that kind of stuff, it goes white. It's her overdosing. But at the same time, I can also see her playing both sides of the coin to herself, where if she continues down this road, she'll end up in option B, where she's literally just completely ripping to shreds the family. Whereas with option A, if she actually tries, she'll have a lot more support, she'll have a lot more, I guess, love coming from her family as total, if she decides to not go down the road. It's kind of hard to say. I can see it because last time I watched this movie, before I watched it for this viewing, I saw it as she has a choice. And I saw it as she's survived now, but she has a choice. If she's going to continue down this path, this is the path, this is the ultimate goal she's going to reach, which is pretty much a complete disconnect from the family, if not death. At the same time, if she continues down path A, where she tries to get better, then things will be a lot different. This time around, when I watched it for the second time, I can see where Trey is leading towards Krisha actually overdosing in the end. And I say that because this whole movie is based off of an actual situation that happened with the family, where a cousin came for a Thanksgiving dinner and actually relapsed and overdosed at that Thanksgiving dinner. Oh, wow. And so what this movie is essentially a retelling of that very hurtful and unfortunate story that happened to this family, but in a way that shows this is what happens to drug abuse, and when it comes to drug abuse in the family. So I can see it going both ways. I don't really know where I land on it just yet. And some days, depending on what time I watch it, I could be one or the other.
And the way that I saw it when it faded to white was, I guess you could see like fading to white, like, yeah, she's dead. But I could also see that as more of a symbolic for like purity or hope or cleansing. Yeah. So I could see it going both ways. I guess if it was going to go a certain way, I'm not entirely convinced. In fact, I guess I don't believe that she ever does go get the vodka and sniff the pills. I think that's just a possible scenario that she's seeing, because that seems to be born out of that crazy victim situation where her sister's like, you're worthless. And then it goes downhill from there. Right. Whereas the first situation, her sister is very loving towards her. So I'm more inclined to believe the first situation truly occurs. And then it's saying like, this is what could happen. I think he walks that line pretty well of not being too definitive on what it is and leaving it up to us, but nevertheless leaving us with that cautionary tale of this is what will happen. And clearly, right, as you said, he is speaking from real life personal experience. I guess this brings up one issue I do have with the movie. I don't have much issues. This is really the only thing is, if he is going to go down this road of showing us two possible scenarios where the ending scenario is the very harsh, dark one where it ends in literally fighting and just total destruction, I do wish that, I know maybe you'll completely disagree with me and maybe it would be a little too cheesy or something. I do wish that we would have had a brief glimpse of a very hopeful moment of Krisha kind of looking into the future and seeing her and her family restored, where she is at that table and her son are on better terms. So I think I would have liked to have seen a bit more redemption in this. I understand it's a cautionary tale, but I think maybe that could have provided a slightly more hopeful outcome.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I could definitely see where if there was a scene that showed more definitively what Krisha's life would be like if she decided to get better. I can see why that would be a criticism to not show something like that. I can see where that could play into the story very well. I don't know if that was, I think because of the situation that happened with the director and what he's trying to say, being somewhat ambiguous with this ending, where he's showing both sides of the coin, where depending on which path you go down, this is where you're gonna end up. I think it does a good job at kind of stopping right before you really see the ending of that situation, because you get for Krisha, for option A, where she has full support of her family and has a second chance with her family, if she tries again, we never get to see, that happen. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, you do see how Krisha's more self-destructive nature takes complete control of her, but you never see the aftermath of that situation. You just see Krisha smashing plates and going crazy and attacking her sister, and seems to insinuate that she does end up overdosing in the end. So I think I'm seeing, so it's again, kind of both ways this could go down, but at the same time, kind of leaving what happens after those moments up to more of audience interpretation. And really this whole ending, I feel, is audience interpretation as to which path they feel Krisha ends up going down in the end, even though it doesn't explicitly say which one she does go down.
Yeah, I just found it interesting that right after the sister says, "I will love you always," and then Krisha is sitting there, but then all of a sudden she remembers everything in this weird way and then goes bug nuts on everybody, and they go crazy on her too. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting that Schultz does seem to give like a little bit more preference to showing the outcome of that path, or at least maybe not the outcome, but going farther down that path. That's when I wish I could have seen two family dinners. One where everything is crying and destruction and tears, and then one where everything is restored. We don't get that. At least we get that love of message, but I'm thinking Schultz prefers a cautionary tale, and I think he was worried that if he did show too much of the other ending, the happy ending, as you may call it, that we don't truly get to see, I'm thinking he thought that might have lessened the impact of the cautionary ending.
Yeah, I think you're correct on that. I think that the way that he does present this ending is trying to elicit more of a fear response from the audience. It is, I think, without a doubt, a cautionary tale. But I think the way that the message is presented seems to lean towards the worst side of the situation, where that's the part that's going to probably be more impactful, seeing how bad it could get, instead of the other way around. Even though he does have a lot of hope in this movie, there is a lot of hope, especially in this ending scene where her sister, even though Krisha's really screwed up and has relapsed, and right in front of her eyes, she's still willing to give her another chance and is still willing to help her out and get her back into the family. So yeah, I can see where Trey Edward Schultz would be more inclined to lean towards the heavier side of the story, because that would leave a much bigger impact on the audience, perhaps. But I can see your criticism.
Yeah, and life doesn't always have a happy ending in certain circumstances, like it was with his family. So that's perfectly fine if that's the route he prefers to go down. I do at least appreciate if it's not going to go, too far, I would say, into redemption. It gives at least a glimmer of redemption, which it is appreciated, but it at least I would say, goes full on cautionary tale. And it's like, do you want a life like this? No, who would? So turn your life around, basically, or else it's going to end in tears and probably death and being disowned. And I gotta say, hard to watch there.
Oh yeah, no. This scene at the end when Robin and Krisha have their first conversation. I forget the line exactly, but there's a line in there that Robin has when she's talking to her sister. It's one of the last lines she has before the situation switches. Mm-hmm. That the last few times I've watched this literally have me almost in tears.
Oh yeah,
because the acting is just so raw and is so real that every time it never fails to get me every time. Oh. One of the things I do want to talk about real quick is this idea of motherhood, this theme of motherhood, which I feel is just plagued all around this movie. Although it's a bit more subtle in how it's presented than the actual drug abuse and substance abuse part of it. Because we find out a little bit later, it's kind of hard to say when exactly the movie tells us that Trey and Krisha are mother and child, but we find out that, they are mother and child. And we do know that the baby that's in this story is a very newborn baby with this very young couple, right? So we have images in this here that kind of reflect that, where you have the baby feeding off of the breast, and then it cuts to that actual newborn in that mother's arms. And then not long after that, I think it's actually the next shot, you have Krisha sitting next to her mother. So this movie has a lot to say in terms of motherhood. And the very ending scene when she's at the table, Trey is wearing red, Krisha is wearing red, and Gigi is wearing red. The trio is all wearing red, and then you also have the other family members wearing blue. And so this movie has a lot to do with like motherhood, and mostly what does it mean to be a mother? Because we do find out that sounds like Gigi was kind of absent for a lot of their lives, and Robin was the one who kind of raised the family. And so, yeah, once again, what does it mean to be a mother, even if you're not there to really take care of your child because you're addicted and you're abusing drugs? What does that mean? Are you actually this person's mother? Even though you are biologically, what is a mother? Is it one that raises the child or the one who gave birth to the child?
Yeah, the film does a fantastic job of showing real life ramifications of how certain choices, especially like you said, involving motherhood, really do come down through the generations. Because I thought it was an interesting choice to make the grandmother have dementia, because it seemingly shows to possibly exonerate her from her choices, because she can't be held responsible because she doesn't remember them and she's very old and senile. But nevertheless, all of these choices have still occurred and all of the consequences are playing out. But on the other hand, I did like the mother with the newborn child, and just showing really that love and compassion towards that child. And you get the feeling that Krisha and her sisters probably didn't really get that with their mom very often. We see one old family picture of them, but I did think that was, especially towards the end there, a really beautiful montage of their faces, and just kind of that kind of cycle of life. And it calls to mind how like precious life is, and how it's best not to waste it on such things, and to really be grateful for what you have. And then I think it also comes down to kind of depicting the character's responsibility, because when Krisha falls asleep and it's like that hand grabs her face, and I think it's just kind of that like smack of reality that, you have been a failure, and what are you going to do about it? And ultimately that's when the diverging choices occur.
Right. So one more thing about Gigi, surprise, surprise, she wasn't acting in this movie. She is the grandmother, and she actually has dementia. Oh. And so when she's brought in on set for the first time we see her throughout this entire movie, she's not acting at all. She has no idea that she's even in a movie, I don't think, because she's just acting normally. There isn't anything special about her acting in this movie. Would you believe that?
No, I was wondering that, because watching the movie, I'm like, could have fooled me. I really do think she has dementia. And I'm like, dang, that's incredible if she really did memorize those lines and go through all of that. So I guess it wasn't a choice to write the grandma with dementia. But nevertheless, I still do think it does play well in the story of a mother who has literally forgotten her children. And then Krisha, who seems to have forgotten her son because she abandoned him for 10 years. And so how do you deal with the loss of a mother? And it also goes to show you how important mothers are in their children's lives and the effects that they can have through the generations.
Right. And I would even say it's also a warning sign of living without love, right? Because we know Krisha is wanting to get back with her son, Trey. And while she does attempt to do that, because of how much damage there is there to that relationship, where she's literally just been absent for a good portion of his life, it's going to take a lot longer than just a day for that relationship to get repaired. And so you see how Krisha, how she wants somebody to love her so bad. She begs Trey to take her back. And then we also have the character of Richard, who she's constantly trying to get in contact with. She calls him at the very beginning, even though we don't know that's Richard at the time, and then calls him twice at the very end, and then eventually just curses him and says, "I hope you die," because he says, "I'll be there for you through thick and thin, through anything," but when she needs him most, he's not there. And so it's also kind of in the same vein, a cautionary tale, about what it's like to maybe live with not a lot of love, and at least in your perception, because that can cause a lot of issues that this movie just kind of shows, along with the substance abuse and what it means to be a mother, things of that nature.
As soon as Krisha got on the phone and called Richard, I thought she is very codependent because she can't even make it. I don't even know how long she's been there. She can't even make it 5, 6, 7 hours, maybe at the most, with her family before running back to her boyfriend, I guess. And there's no problem of wanting your significant other to be with you. But when you can't stand on your own 2 feet and you need somebody else, then yeah, that's codependency, which is incredibly unhealthy. And most addicts are very codependent. And I did like how that came full circle and the line really struck me when she said, when you told me to need you, when you said, call me if you need anything, or something like that. Call me if you need me, is what he said. And the way she rephrased it seems to twist his words, but then at the same time is the absolute truth. And you can see how also that can be very damaging to somebody who is codependent. Just kind of the weight and responsibility that creates a very unhealthy relationship.
Right. So before we get to our final thoughts, even though this is one of my favorites, I do still have a couple of things that I don't like about it.
Oh, okay.
The twist of this movie where we find out that Krisha is the mother of Trey, I do kind of wish that this was made a bit more subtle, because when she has that conversation, when she has the private conversation with Trey, it's pretty much spelled out for you that they are mother and son. It doesn't tell you until the very end what doesn't definitively tell us until the very end that they are mother and son. But in that conversation, it's pretty much written on the wall, she gave birth to him. So I do kind of wish that they would have held this twist out a little bit longer. So that way, when this ending does come and you get this twist of she's the mother of Trey, that it hits a bit harder than, kind of not being as subtle here in this one scene. Although I love the scene, it's a great scene. I do kind of wish that they, Trey would have maybe made it a bit more subtle as to what the relationship is. But I do see how important this scene is at the same time.
I guess I never saw it as a twist that Trey was her son, because as soon as he comes in the door and they hug each other and she starts to tear up and he clearly doesn't want to be around her and she's struggling to be around her, I figured that was probably her son. And I didn't really know her relation to anybody else, save I guess Robin was her sister. I don't think I'm still quite sure who is whose son, or who's that young girl hanging around the background with the dark hair. No idea.
I don't know. The family dynamics of this movie don't really explain a whole lot as to who's who in this movie. We know that I think Doyle is married to what's her name? I think it's Bibi, I believe her name is. Doyle is married to one of the sisters. I think that there are 3 or 4 sisters. I forget the names of 2 of them, but so there are 3 or 4 sisters, and then of course you've got Trey and the younger kids who are more or less the nieces and nephews off of those sisters. I don't really know exactly what the family tree is with the Schultz family in this movie. It's kind of not really explained a lot. They don't really go too deep into that portion of the family.
Yeah, but I guess I don't really necessarily need to know those family members.
Yeah, I agree. My other criticism is now, okay, in a general sense, the comic relief is fine. It's actually very needed in a movie this heavy, but there is also a kind of random scene which makes sense in context, because the scene is kind of walking through sex at this point, or the montage is walking through sex at this point, because you've got the young couple sitting on like a wicker couch in the backyard. talking about how they want to, the girl is making fun of him because he always wants some. Right. But then it also is intercut with the two boys who are in the parents' room, Robin and Dr. Decker's room, David, I believe is his name, in their room when they're watching porn. Is the weirdest scene. In context, it makes a little bit more sense than it does outside of that context. But at the same time, I don't really see what exactly the real reason it's in here for, other than just purely for comic relief.
Yeah, that scene was really bizarre. You warned me of that scene, and it's not like too graphic or anything.
No, it's not.
I guess it's trying to give ease the tension a little bit, so it's not this 80 minutes of high blood pressure stress of that. It's a little weird that those two guys, who I guess are like older teenagers, would go to the parents' bedroom to watch stuff like that, and their dad catches them, but they don't get in trouble. It's weird. Honestly, I forgot it's in there, so they could probably have completely done without that. Yeah. Some of the openness of the conversations did strike me as very odd, like when that young married couple was talking about their sex life in very kind of immature, childish terms. It seems like anybody who would be out there around could hear. I had the suspicion that Krisha could hear them. So I don't know. Yeah, that was kind of odd, and how different parts of that. It seemed like we were in on certain conversations that should have remained private. I'm not really sure what they were trying to do with that either.
Yeah. But at the same time, though, these two criticisms I feel are relatively benign. They don't necessarily ruin the movie for me in any way. I mean, we're talking about this movie, and it's one of my favorites. So these are pretty minor complaints that I have with it. There are, kind of like what you said, there aren't a lot that I have, even in my notes, and even these I had to kind of think about and like, okay, well, what do I think is wrong with this? So yeah, I don't have a lot of complaints, which is surprising because this is a first-time director directing a movie that is really, really heavy and does a really good job, because it's, at the same time, while it is very impactful and very meaningful to this director, it's also very simple. It's kind of hard for me to explain this movie to somebody without giving something away, without spoiling some aspect of the movie. My roommates asked me when I was about to watch this for this podcast, like, what's it about? And I was like, that's kind of hard to say. I can say it's about substance abuse and alcohol abuse, and that's really about all I can give before I feel I'm getting into spoilers at that point. And I love that, because it's just one of those things where you just kind of have to watch it to understand what exactly this movie is without giving away too much where it becomes spoilers.
Well, Alan, what is your rating and recommendation for Krisha?
The reason why it's one of my favorite movies is not only because of its depiction, its very strangely accurate depiction of family compared to my own, its very personal message and very personal story that it has that actually happened to this family, the raw acting that comes from the family members who are actually family members and friends of this family, at the same time filmed at a location that is owned by the parents. This is the parents' house of Trey. It's surprisingly, because of how, I guess, close to Trey's real life this movie is, I feel that's what helps it feel so impactful and so real. And I absolutely love that. This is the reason why it's one of my favorite movies, is because of all these little background information pieces. The fact that this is a story that happened, the fact that this was filmed at a house with all his family members. I think that these are things that help the movie, in my mind, shed some different light on this movie, which would otherwise be a very dour and very sad movie, into a movie that makes a bit more sense to me why Trey would decide to write something like this. At the end of the day, while I do have couple of things that I don't like about it, I can't help but not fall in love with this movie every single time that I watch it. Every time I know something different, every time I want to feel that same emotion that I felt the first time that I watched it. And I love that. I'm so glad that I finally get to own it on Blu-ray here soon, now it's back in print. So at the end of the day, yeah, I absolutely adore Krisha. And if you haven't seen it, please go watch it, because I think it's honestly a great film, especially one from a first-time director. So yeah, 10 out of 10 for me, highest of recommends.
Krisha is a heartbreaking, surreal film about the resounding effects addiction can have not only on one person's life, but on those surrounding the person. It's a hard watch as this aging woman tries to reconnect with her estranged family, particularly her son and her inevitable relapse. This film isn't entirely a tragedy, but more so a cautionary tale, one that provides possibly hope, but possibly destruction. I am blown away by Trey Edward Schultz's directorial debut, along with how he edits the film and tells the story. The acting is top rate, especially from Krisha Fairchild. In many ways, this doesn't feel like a movie, and that's exactly what Schultz wants. He wants us to be a fly on the wall as the camera lingers in the intimate spaces reserved only for those occupying them. But nevertheless, we want to watch and often strain to listen because we fully know how people hide their sorrows. This isn't one I could probably watch again because of the depressing subject matter. Yet, nevertheless, it is one you should absolutely watch. Krisha is an outstanding drama that was woefully overlooked by the Academy Awards. Krisha receives 8 stars out of 10 with a strong recommend.
So, at this point, I have seen 2 of the 3 Trey Edward Schultz movies. Now I own 2 of the 3 Trey Edward Schultz movies, and I really want to see Waves so bad, which at this point I hear now has got a wider release. Although at the time this podcast is out, it might not be in theaters anymore. Either way, I'm going to see Waves at some point, and I hear it's really good, and I'm really excited for it if I can get around to seeing it. Hopefully I do. I'm sure I will.
I'm really intrigued to see it comes at night. As of right now, it's streaming on Prime Video, and I've not seen it. It's one I've meant to get around to for the past 2 years-ish since it's been released. But now that I know it was Trey Edward Schultz's second film, and there was some controversy surrounding that film, I'm really intrigued to watch that. So yeah. I'll put out my review and thoughts when I watch it on Letterboxd.
Right. I know that one is also a movie that was based off of a real life story that happened. Once again, kind of like this movie. I don't know the specifics of that story. I just saw the headline that it is based off of a story of something that actually happened to the director. And he did state that he likes writing stories off of real life experiences. So we'll see, I guess, where it goes. I do know for the fact that of the 3 movies that he's produced, they all deal heavily with family. Family is like the main focus of the movie for the 3 that he's produced so far. So I'm curious to see what Waves is about. I'm really, really curious to know.
Yeah, I am too. Well, Alan, I hope you had a good birthday.
I did. I'm glad I just got to watch this movie again, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm really glad you picked it as well, because I knew it was one you love and you've been wanting to see for a long time. So I'm glad we got to talk about it here on the podcast, and also hopefully turn some folks onto it that had never heard of this film. I think it's a fairly unknown film, would be my guess.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely has, people know about it. Like, it's not like completely disappeared. People know about it. I think it's just a movie that, because of how unpopular it is, it hasn't gotten much acclaim. Although we'll see if that changes with Waves, with people coming back and finding that both his other 2 movies are streaming right now. So we'll see. I don't know. Time will tell.
Regardless, Trey Edward Schultz is absolutely a director to watch, just as we thought of Damien Chazelle and how he has skyrocketed to fame. I'm very intrigued to see where Trey Edward Schultz will go from here. And who knows, I could definitely see him going to the Oscars. And if his work it continues to go from the caliber he started with on Krisha, I'm very excited for his career.
Yes, I am too. I can say that I think Krisha, of the 2 that I've seen from him, Krisha is still my favorite. But It Comes at Night is still a very well done film. From what I remember, I've only seen it once.
Well, listeners, we want to know what you thought of Krisha. Does this resonate with a family member that you've had, or maybe with your own life? How did the movie impact you? We're very curious to see your thoughts as well. So don't forget to comment that down below. And while you're down below, make sure to check out all of those links so you can stay connected with us here on Silver Screen Guide. And if you haven't already, click subscribe. Now would be a great time. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends and family. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Sure thing.
Listeners, we will see you next week with the remake, I guess, of Jacob's Ladder. I'm pretty curious to see about that movie. We did review the original Jacob's Ladder, so make sure to check out that review. But I'll be honest, I'm kind of nervous as to this one.
I'm curious. I'm curious to see what happens with a remake of Jacob's Ladder. I wonder what kind of social significance this new one have, if any. I guess time will tell. Next week, we'll be able to decide what exactly is up with Jacob's Ladder, the new 2019 remake.
We will see you next week, listeners, with Jacob's Ladder. Hey listeners, it's Corbin. Don't forget to check out the exciting links in the description below that will connect you with more great movie reviews for your listening pleasure, and our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page, and of course our official website where you can read great articles and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Also, if you want exclusive bonus content such as extra movie reviews, movie commentaries, and our thoughts on the latest movie news and trailers, plus more, then check out our Patreon page. It's a great way to help keep this show free, and it gives you great content that's yours to keep. All of that and more is found in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe whether you're on YouTube, Apple, Google, or Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. And while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review so other movie lovers can more easily find our podcast. We love talking about movies, and we love talking about them with you. So don't forget to share with your friends and family. And we'll see you next week, listeners. The Silver Screen Guide podcast is edited and produced by Alan and Corbin. Intro and outro music is created by Thomas Rankin. The thoughts and opinions herein expressed are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent those held by Silver Screen Guide. Silver Screen Guide is not affiliated with any company or individual involved with the creation of this movie or TV show. No portion of the podcast may be used without express written permission from Silver Screen Guide.